The clerk's voice on the phone told me before she finished the sentence. I was sitting in the recovery wing of Fairview Memorial in Tulsa, Oklahoma, 11 days after my hip replacement, when the front desk called my room to say a man named Walter Combs had come to see me and had been turned away. Walter Combs is not my friend. Walter Combs is my accountant of 31 years, and more than that, he is the man who has held every number in my life in careful order since before my wife Dorothy died, and I had asked him to come that afternoon for a reason that had nothing to do with friendship and everything to do with the fact that something was wrong with my finances, and I did not yet know how wrong. He said he had an appointment, the clerk told me, reading from a note she clearly had not written herself. But there's a restriction on your file. Visitors need approval from your daughter. I asked her to repeat that. Your daughter, Miss Priscilla Combs, I'm sorry, Priscilla Doyle, she's listed as your care coordinator. She left instructions this morning that all visitors need to be cleared through her first. I want you to understand something about me before I go further into this, because it matters for what comes next. My name is Harold Fenwick. I am 63 years old. I spent 38 years as a machinist at the Tulsa rail yards, running lathes and mills, with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, and if there is one thing that trade teaches a man, it is that small deviations, left unchecked, become large ones. A shaft that is off by 2 thousandths at the start of a run is off by a quarter inch by the end of it, and by then the part is scrap, and you have wasted the whole day's stock. You learn to catch the drift early. You learn to measure constantly, not because you distrust the machine, but because you understand that drift is not a single event. It is a process. I had missed the drift in my own family for 6 years. I was about to catch it in a hospital bed with a new hip and a phone in my hand. Dorothy passed in 2019. Aortic aneurysm. No warning. Gone in the time it took the ambulance to cross town. We had been married 39 years. We had one child, our daughter Priscilla, who was 36 years old that day. The clerk called my room, married to a man named Roy Doyle, who sold insurance out of an office on Memorial Drive, and who I liked well enough, though I had never once, in 9 years of him being my son-in-law, felt that I fully knew him. Priscilla was not the problem. I want to be careful here, the way I have been careful my whole working life, because precision matters, and because what happened is not a simple story about a bad daughter. It is a story about a woman named Marisol Alvarado Doyle, and about how a person can walk into a family sideways, through a door nobody thought to lock, and rearrange the furniture until you no longer recognize which room you are standing in. Marisol is Roy's younger sister. She had moved from Amarillo to Tulsa 4 years earlier, after her own marriage ended, and Roy, being the kind of brother he is, had helped her find an apartment 2 miles from his and Priscilla's house, and had, without any of us quite noticing it happen, begun, including her, in everything: Sunday, dinners, holidays, decisions. She was sharp, likable, endlessly helpful, the kind of woman who showed up with a casserole before you had finished telling her you'd had a hard week. She called me Pop within 8 months of meeting me, which I let go because it seemed unkind to correct her, and because at the time it seemed like nothing, like warmth, like a woman finding her footing in a new city by attaching herself to a family that had room for her. It was not nothing. I understand that now, the way I understand, looking back at 30 years of surveying tolerances, exactly where the first thousandth of drift occurred. It occurred the year Marisol started managing my calendar. I want to explain how that happened, because it is the part of this story that matters most, and it is the part I think a lot of people watching this will recognize in their own lives, whether the person doing it was a daughter-in-law, a sister-in-law, a stepson, a neighbor who made themselves indispensable. It never announced itself. Marisol did not one day declare that she would be handling my affairs. She began by noticing that I forgot doctor's appointments, which was true. I did, especially after Dorothy died, when the house got quiet enough that I stopped needing to track time in the same way, and she began calling to remind me, and then she began driving me, because you shouldn't be behind the wheel after a procedure, Pop, and then she began coming into the appointments with me, because 4 ears are better than 2 when the doctor's talking. And every single one of these things, taken alone, was true and kind and reasonable. I did forget appointments. I did sometimes mishear a doctor. 4 ears probably were better than 2. But by the 3rd year, Marisol was the one who knew my medication schedule better than I did. She was the one the pharmacy called when a refill was ready. She had, at some point I cannot precisely date, to become the name on a limited power of attorney. I did not fully remember signing a document she had brought to me, folded inside a stack of other papers on a Tuesday when I was tired and trusting, and had just come from a colonoscopy, and which she described to me as just something so I can help with the small stuff if you're ever laid up, Pop, nothing major. And I signed it the way a man signs a receipt, without reading every line, because the woman handing it to me had brought me chicken and dumplings the week before and had sat with me on the anniversary of Dorothy's death, so I would not sit alone. That is the whole method. That is how it works. You cannot object to chicken and dumplings. You cannot refuse a woman who sits with you on the day your wife died. Every individual kindness is real kindness, and the sum of all that kindness is a cage, and you do not see the bars until you are standing inside them, looking out. The hip replacement was scheduled for a Thursday in October. Routine surgery, the kind men my age have every week in this country, and I went in expecting to be home in 4 days. Priscilla drove me. Roy came by that evening. Marisol arrived the next morning with flowers and a folder. She was always arriving with a folder. That was one of her habits. A woman who believed paperwork was a form of love, and she told the nurse at the station that she would be coordinating Pop's care going forward because Priscilla worked full-time and Roy traveled for his job, and somebody needed to be the point of contact. And the nurse, seeing a competent, organized, clearly devoted family member, wrote it down. That is all it took. A woman with a folder and a confident voice and a note went into my file. I did not know about the note for 6 days. I was recovering from anesthesia, then recovering from the surgery itself, then dealing with the specific fog that comes after a man my age goes under for 3 hours. And by the time my head cleared enough to notice that something was wrong, the pattern had already been operating for nearly a week. What I noticed first was small. My phone had gone missing from the bedside table, and when I asked about it, Marisol told me the hospital had a policy about personal electronics near certain monitoring equipment, which was not true, and which I did not have the clarity to challenge in the moment. I noticed that when the physical therapist came in to discuss my discharge plan, Marisol answered questions that were directed at me. I noticed that she had begun referring to the plan we've put together for when Pop gets home, and I noticed the way you notice a hairline crack in a casting only after you have been staring at the same piece of metal for an hour, that the word we no longer seemed to include me in any operational sense. It included her and Roy. Increasingly, it seemed to exclude Priscilla too, who I began to realize was being kept at a professional distance from her own father's recovery by a sister-in-law who had appointed herself the family's central nervous system. Walter Combs is the man who caught it, though not in the way you might expect, and not because I called him first. Walter called me. He called my hospital room on a Tuesday morning because he had been trying to reach me for 4 days about something in my accounts that troubled him, and every call had gone to Marisol's cell phone, which had somehow become the contact number on file for anyone trying to reach the Fenwick family regarding Harold's affairs. I answered my own phone that Tuesday morning for the first time in 6 days, because Marisol had stepped out to get coffee and had left it on the tray table by mistake, and Walter's voice on the other end had the particular tightness of a man who has been trying to say something important to the wrong person for too long. "Harold," he said, "thank God. I need to talk to you directly, and I need you to tell me if you authorized a withdrawal of $41,000 from your money market account in the last 10 days. I had authorized nothing of the kind. I am not going to walk you through every minute of that call, because what matters is not the forensic detail, it is the feeling, which was the feeling of a floor giving way beneath a man who believed he was standing on solid ground." Walter told me that Marisol, using the limited power of attorney I had signed 18 months earlier, the just for the small stuff document, had made 3 transfers in the 10 days since my surgery, totaling just over $41,000, moved into an account that was not mine. He told me he had flagged it with the bank the moment he saw it, because the amounts exceeded what any reasonable reading of a limited power of attorney for small household matters should permit, and the bank had frozen further activity pending my confirmation, but that confirmation required me, specifically, in person or by verified phone call. and every attempt the bank had made to reach me had been intercepted and handled smoothly, competently, with a folder full of explanations. I am certain by Marisol. She told the bank you were too unwell after the surgery to be bothered with financial matters, Walter said. She told them she was handling everything on your behalf under the power of attorney. Harold, I need you to tell me right now if that's true, because if it's not, we are past the point of a misunderstanding. I looked at the ceiling of my hospital room, the way I imagine every man in a story like this looks at the ceiling of his hospital room, because there is nowhere else to put your eyes when the ground has just moved. 38 years of catching drift before it became scrap, and I had let 6 years of it accumulate in my own house, in my own family, because the woman doing it brought flowers and remembered anniversaries and called me Pop. Walter, I said, come to the hospital. Come today. Ask for room 318. He told me he'd been trying. He told me the front desk had turned him away that morning, said visitors needed approval from my daughter's office. Though it hadn't been Priscilla who left that instruction, the note listed Marisol's cell number as the coordinating contact, with Priscilla's name attached to it in a way that made it look official, without Priscilla having any idea it existed. There is something I have to tell you before I tell you what I did next, because I think it matters. If you are watching this, and you know what it is to have someone in your life who has never done a single thing to you that could not be explained as help, if you know what it is to look back over years of casseroles and calendar, reminders and rides to appointments, and realize you cannot point to one moment where you should have said no, because every moment, alone, was reasonable, then I think this story is for you. If you have ever been the person in the bed, weakened just enough that someone decided your weakness was an opportunity, this is for you too. I asked the nurse for my phone charger, because the battery was low, and I intended to be on it for a while. The first call was not to Walter. Walter already knew. The first call was to a lawyer named Rosalind Kemper, who had handled Dorothy's estate 7 years earlier, and who I had gone to see, on my own initiative, 4 months before the surgery, to update my will and my powers of attorney because I had turned 63 that spring and had read an article about elder financial abuse that had unsettled me enough to act on it, though at the time I could not have told you why it unsettled me so specifically. I understand now. Some part of me had been measuring the drift even when I could not name it. Rosalind answered on the second ring. I told her where I was and what Walter had told me. I told her about the note on my hospital file, about the intercepted calls, about the $41,000. She was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of a professional, confirming that what she is hearing matches a pattern she has seen before and has been dreading seeing in this specific case. Harold, she said, when we redid your documents in June, do you remember the specific instruction you gave me about the limited power of attorney you'd signed for Marisol? I told her I remembered giving the instruction, though not the precise wording. You told me you wanted it revoked entirely and replaced with a new durable power of attorney, naming only Priscilla, effective immediately, with no overlap. I filed the revocation with your bank's legal department in June. It has been on record for 4 months. Which means, Harold, that as of June, Marisol Doyle has had no legal authority to conduct any transaction on your accounts whatsoever. The ceiling of room 318. Does Priscilla know she's my sole proxy? I asked. She knows she's named. I'm not certain she understood the practical weight of it, because you asked me at the time not to make a production of it within the family. You said you didn't want to cause friction before there was a reason to. There was a reason now. Rosalind, I said, how fast can you be here? Give me 40 minutes. The second call was to Priscilla directly, not to explain everything, because I did not yet trust myself to explain it without the kind of anger that would have made the conversation about my feelings instead of about the facts, but to ask her one question and to listen very carefully to the answer. Priscilla, I said, did you authorize any restriction on my hospital visitors or any change to who's listed as my care coordinator? The silence on her end lasted long enough that I had my answer before she gave it. No, she said. Dad, what are you talking about? I didn't authorize anything. I've been trying to get updates from the hospital all week, and everyone keeps telling me Marisol already has it covered, that she's the point of contact. A pause, and I could hear something shifting in her voice, the sound of a woman running back through 6 days of small deferrals and finding, all at once, that they added up to something she did not like. Dad, is something wrong? Come to the hospital, I said. Bring Roy. Not right this minute, give me 2 hours. There are some things I need to sort out first, and then I need the two of you to hear them the right way, all at once, not in pieces. She agreed, though I could hear in her voice that the 2 hours would be difficult ones for her. The third call was to Walter Combs, to tell him the front door was about to open, that he should come straight up to 318 and not stop at any desk, because in 20 minutes there would be a note removed from my file and an attorney in the room to make certain it stayed removed. He was there in 11 minutes. He must have been sitting in the parking lot. Walter Combs is not a warm man in the way people usually mean warm. He is precise, economical with words, the kind of accountant who has spent 31 years finding the one number that does not belong among 10,000 that do. But he sat down in the chair beside my bed, and he took off his glasses and cleaned them on his shirt, which is a thing he does when he is genuinely upset and trying not to show it. And he said, "Harold, I should have called you directly the moment the pattern started, not routed it through whoever answered the family line. I'm sorry. I let smooth talk stand in for verification, and that's exactly the mistake 31 years in this business should have trained out of me." I told him he had caught it inside of 2 weeks, which is faster than most people catch anything, and that the ledger was the whole reason we were sitting here having this conversation at all, instead of discovering it in the spring. Rosalind Kemper arrived at 2:40 that afternoon with a leather bag and the specific bearing of a woman who has spent a long career walking into rooms where something has gone sideways and knowing exactly how to stand in them. She looked at Walter. Walter looked at her. Tulsa is not such a large town that an estate attorney and a forensic-minded accountant with 3 decades in the same zip code do not eventually cross paths. "Miss Kemper," Walter said. "Walter," she said, and there was the specific ease of two professionals who trust each other's competence without needing to test it. Rosalind set her bag on the tray table and opened it. "I've already been in contact with the hospital's patient advocate on my way up," she said. "The restriction on your visitor list has been removed. I've also delivered a formal letter to the charge nurse and to hospital administration, clarifying that no one, including Marisol Doyle, has standing to restrict your visitors, receive information about your condition, or represent herself as your care coordinator. That authority belongs to you, and in your incapacity, to Priscilla alone, under the June documents." She pulled a single page from the bag. "This is a notice to the bank confirming the June revocation is still in force and instructing them to treat any transaction attempted under the old power of attorney as unauthorized. Walter already has a copy for his own records. I'm also drafting a formal demand for the return of the $41,000, which we will pursue through the bank's fraud department and, if necessary, through the district attorney's office. Because, Harold, I want to be plain with you. What happened here is not a gray area. It is not an aggressive interpretation of an ambiguous document. It is theft from a man recovering from surgery, using authority that had already been revoked, and I will not soften that language for anyone's comfort." I told her not to soften it. "One more thing," she said. "I want to close every remaining gap in your documents while we're at it. Not because June wasn't thorough, but because this event tells us exactly where the next attempt would come from if we leave anything open. I want a letter of instruction on permanent file at this hospital, and at every account you hold, naming exactly who has standing to act for you and under what conditions, so that no one with a folder and a confident voice can ever again talk their way past a nurse's station." I told her to close every gap. Priscilla and Roy arrived a little after 4. I watched my daughter's face when she came through the door and found Rosalind Kemper on one side of my bed and Walter Combs on the other, and I watched the specific arithmetic happen behind her eyes. The same arithmetic, I imagine, happens behind the eyes of anyone who walks into a room and realizes, all at once, that they have been the last person in the family to be told the truth about their own family. I did not make her wait. I told her everything, from the folder full of small kindnesses 6 years back to the $41,000 10 days ago, and I told it without dressing it up and without softening it, because Priscilla is 36 years old and she deserved the whole shape of it, not a version edited for her comfort. Roy sat very still through most of it, the stillness of a man watching two things he loves, his wife's family and his own sister, arrive in a configuration he cannot immediately reconcile. When I finished, he He did not defend Marisol, which I want to note, because it would have been easy for him to reach for the charitable interpretation, the one that says she was only trying to help. She got carried away. She didn't mean the 41,000 the way it looks. He did not do that. He put his hands flat on his knees, the way a man does when he is trying to hold something in place, and he said, I need to call her. I need to hear it from her directly. And then I need to decide what I'm going to do about my own sister. And Harold, I am not going to pretend that's going to be easy, but I am not going to make excuses for her either. I told him I did not expect him to make excuses. I told him I expected him to see clearly, and that seeing clearly is the hardest and most necessary thing any of us can offer the people we love when they have gone wrong. Priscilla did not say much that first evening. She sat by the bed after Rosalind and Walter left, and she held my hand the way she used to hold Dorothy's hand as a little girl crossing a parking lot, and she said, Dad, I let her handle things because it was easier, because she was better at the folders and the phone calls than I was, and I told myself that made her more capable, not more dangerous. I told her that was the whole trick of it, that the people who do this kind of harm are almost always more capable with the folders and the phone calls, and that capability is not the same as trustworthiness, and mistaking one for the other is not a failure of love, it is simply a mistake, and mistakes can be corrected. I was discharged 8 days later, on a Tuesday, my hip healing on schedule, the rest of it healing on a slower and less predictable timeline. Rosalind met me at my house on Birch Hollow Lane the following week with the finished documents, the old power of attorney formally and permanently voided in writing everywhere it had ever been recorded, a new letter of instruction filed at Fairview Memorial and at both banks I use, Priscilla named clearly and singularly wherever authority might ever be needed again. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Dorothy used to do the crossword every Sunday morning, and Rosalind closed her folder and looked at me and said, Dorothy would have caught this in the first week. Harold, not the second. She probably would have. Dorothy had a way of looking at people that saw past the folder to the hands holding it. I told Rosalind that Dorothy had always been faster than me about people, the way I was faster than her about tolerances on a lathe, and that between the two of us we usually caught what mattered, just not always in time. You caught it, Rosalind said. That's what matters now. The bank recovered 36,000 of the 41 within 6 weeks, the remainder tied up in an account Marisol had already partially spent down, and Rosalind is still pursuing the balance through channels I trust her to manage without needing me to relive it in detail. I am not going to tell you every part of what happened between Roy and his sister, because that belongs to the two of them, and to the specific and private work of a brother deciding what he owes his family versus what he owes blood. What I will tell you is that Marisol has not been in my house since that October, and that Roy has told me, plainly, that he no longer routes anything through her, financial or otherwise, for anyone in this family. Priscilla and I talk every Sunday now, by phone, the way Dorothy and her mother used to talk. And 3 weeks ago she came by on a Saturday afternoon, and we went through the whole filing cabinet together, every account, every document, until she could recite the location of everything that matters, as easily as I once recited tolerance specs to an apprentice. Not because I distrust her, because I finally understand what I should have understood years ago, which is that the people you trust with your life need to actually know the shape of it, not just be told, in passing, that they are trusted. I still see Walter Combs the first Tuesday of every month, same as I have for 31 years, though our conversations now include a line item they never used to include, a quiet review of exactly who has access to what and exactly why. He told me last month that he wished more of his clients called him back directly instead of letting a helpful relative answer for them. I told him I understood exactly what he meant. I sit on my porch most evenings now, on Birch Hollow Lane, in the chair Dorothy used to sit in beside mine, and I think about how a man can spend 38 years learning to catch 1,000th of an inch of drift in a piece of steel and still miss 6 years of it happening in his own front room because the drift was wearing a warm smile and carrying a casserole dish. I do not say that to excuse myself. I say it because I think somebody watching this needs to hear it plainly. It is not foolishness that lets this happen to a person. It is trust, functioning exactly the way trust is supposed to function, aimed at someone who was never worthy of it. My name is Harold Fenwick. I am 63 years old. I spent my whole working life measuring the difference between what is true and what only looks true at a glance, and it still took me 6 years to apply that same measurement to my own family. If there is somebody in your life right now who has never done a single thing you could point to and call wrong, and yet something in you has been quietly, persistently uneasy for longer than you have admitted out loud, I am asking you, as one of you, as somebody's father sitting on his own porch tonight, to trust that unease. Measure it. Do not wait for the $41,000. Do not wait for the note on the file. Catch the drift while it is still a thousandth of an inch, because I promise you, it does not stay that small forever.